Hi, my name is Kayla. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in January of 2021. Let's go! So recently I've discovered the subreddit of r/52books. So it's reading a book a week for the year, and then by the end of the year you've read 52 books. So I didn't know that reading 52 books a year was a challenge. That was like a real legitimate challenge that people do. I didn't know it was a thing until I discovered this subreddit, and I was like, oh my gosh, all these people are talking about books and it's super exciting, and you get to compare like how many books you've read and like where you're at in the challenge. Super cool. So last year without knowing, I accidentally completed 43 books. Like I keep a list in my journal of the books I've completed. So I went back through and I was like, oh, I read 43 books without even trying. So this year I joined the challenge, and then there's a thing on Goodreads where you can keep track of all the books that you've been reading. So I actually made it my goal to read 52 books this year. And I figure if I did it last year, reading 43 without even trying, this year it'll be, if I'm actually trying, then I'm totally gonna hit the 52 books. So I just want to go through monthly and kind of break down the books that I've read for that month, just kind of for myself so I can keep track, and then just kind of talk about my thoughts on each of those books. So this year for January, I read 8 books. Okay, so here are the list of the 8 books that I finished in January. So my overviews are probably going to have some spoilers. Just beware, if you see a book on this list that you haven't read, you can kind of skip through that part so that if you don't want it ruined for you, I won't accidentally ruin it for you. So at the beginning of the year, I decided to kind of kick off the new year 2021 right and read Harry Potter again. I intended on reading like the whole series this year. I only read the first 2 in January. I don't know. It was nice going back and like rereading them, but like I feel like, especially with me lurking through Reddit so often, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many new books that I haven't read. So for me, kind of going back and rereading the same old book for Harry Potter, I've read it, I feel like, once a year for years. So I know everything that's going to happen, I feel like at this point, if you haven't read Harry Potter, you don't want to, or you have no interest in it. So I'm not really gonna like tell you about Harry Potter because it's Harry Potter. But so I read the first one and I read the second one. Yeah, they're really good. Okay, so technically the second book that I read, because I read it in between the first Harry Potter and the second Harry Potter, was Red, White, and Royal Blue. So basically it's just kind of, it was a fun, light read. It's like a contemporary romance, with the romance being between 2 male leads. So the whole premise of the book basically is that it's so funny, like saying it out loud. So the president's son, so the first son of the United States, and the Prince of England have a love connection. It doesn't start that way. It's kind of like a love turn hate book. But they have like a love connection, and it was cute, but at the same time, I did feel like it was kind of cheesy in the beginning. Like the whole time I was reading it, all I could picture was Prince Harry with some like male model, and they're just kind of like flirting and like, flying across the ocean to see each other frequently. I don't know. It was interesting. I did like their kind of correspondences like over email and stuff like that. Like it was cute. And I really liked like the whole plot of the main character coming to terms with his sexuality and deciding like, not really realizing that about himself, but then coming to terms with it and being like, oh yeah, I'm definitely bisexual. It didn't take me very long to start rooting for the 2 main characters. I think that's just because I'm a sucker for romance novels. Like, oh yeah, guy gets guy, like it's super, super cute. So yeah, I would recommend that one. Okay, so the 4th book that I read in January was Circe. I had to read this book because if you lurk around Reddit at all, as I do frequently on the book subreddits, Circe is recommended so much. Everybody's just like, oh, Circe's so good, it's so good, it's so good. And so I was like, okay, I have to read this book. And I was interested because I think that like Greek mythology and like that type of stuff is really interesting. And I did like the idea how she took the main character of Circe, which is like when I Googled her, I didn't know who Circe was. So when I Googled her and you see that she's like a total side character of all these of the Greek mythology, like she's not a main character, she's not a main goddess, like she's just not. And so I thought it was really interesting how the author was able to take this complete side character that like I had never heard of and give her entire own world, her own life. I think the most surprising part of the book for me was how the author was able to really show the powerful love of a mother towards her child. I've never really gotten to read a book before where you get to hear a parent really talk about like their deep, undying love for their child. For me, I didn't read the book. I didn't physically read the book. I listened to it on audiobook. And I really enjoyed listening to this on audiobook, especially being able to hear like the drama of the person who was reading the book and being able to hear like the correct pronunciation of all the names and everything. I feel like it really added to the story for me. I did feel like the dramatization of the person reading the book, they did a really good job. So I think this book was really beautifully written. I definitely get why everybody on Reddit is like, hey, you should read Circe, because I would recommend people to read this book. You know, if people are like, oh, I'm looking for a good book that's kind of different, I would definitely recommend Circe. Okay, the 5th and the 6th books that I read in January were Midnight Sun and New Moon. So I had Midnight Sun on hold with my library. So I read through Libby, the app, and everything that I want to read is always on hold for like 6 months out. So I remember holding this like late last year, and then it popped up and I was like, okay, I'll read Twilight again. I'll basically just, because it's literally the whole first book, it's just from Edward's point of view. I mean, I get it. I get why she wrote the book. You know, why not? Like, I feel like I had to read this for my preteen teenage self because I was a Twilight fan. I read the books as they came out. Like, I read the first Twilight, and then I remember waiting at Barnes & Noble for the New Moon release, the Eclipse release, and the Breaking Dawn release. Like, I was there, I was a kid, and I was like, yes, I love these books. And I remember, like, I would stay up late, and, like, I would read them, like, until, like, 4 in the morning until I would finish it. Like, I would get the new book and then stay up, and it was a big deal. So when I saw that she had written the first book from his point of view, I was like, well, you know, I have to read it. Like, I'm just curious at this point, like, you know, to hear his thoughts. And like, I don't know, I like reading stories from like a different character's point of view. I especially like when books alternate between the characters. I think that's pretty cool. You kind of see like what's going on in their mind besides like the main character's mind. I really like that. So when I first started reading the Midnight Sun book, I had major deja vu. For probably the first 5 chapters, I was like, I've read this before. I know I have. And not because it's a retelling of Twilight. I have read his version of this before, and it was driving me nuts. I was like, did she already release this book? Am I just crazy? Like, did she not release this recently? So I had to Google, and so it turns out that like 10 years ago, she leaked like the first 5 pages or 5 chapters of this book on her website. And of course, me as a preteen teenager who loved Twilight was all over it. And so I've read the first like 5 chapters before. So for that, I was like, oh yeah, I've read this. And then, I don't know. So I feel like I skipped and I skimmed through a lot of it because a lot of the retelling it's the same. Everything's the same that happens. But you do get to hear his thoughts. And so like the parts where he had like the inner dialogue, I like actually did read, and it made me like really even more uncomfortable than it it did when I was a kid, like reading Twilight. Like, obviously everybody dogs on Twilight, yada yada. But hearing his inner dialogue made it so much worse. So it just creeped me out how she kept describing, or he kept describing in his thoughts how he would have to like control his facial features and like really make sure that he said the right things to her. Like, I remember when I was a teenager and I read Twilight, like I don't remember him being so like calculated, but then like hearing his thoughts, you're like, oh, so you like really like are kind of like a psycho. Like, you like hearing his thoughts, like I it's so weird to like read it, and like it makes you uncomfortable where it's like he literally is controlling everything that he's doing and making it like to lure her in. And I don't know, it just, I feel like it made me hate him even more. I was a Jacob fan, and so it made me just even more be like, well, I don't really like Edward. And actually, it's funny. I was trolling through Reddit, and I found this post that totally struck my core, because it was exactly how I felt as a preteen when I was reading the Twilight series. Like, me just literally being like, oh, Jacob's the best. So I finished Midnight Sun, and at the end, I thought it was interesting. Okay, so go back a little bit. So I near the end of the book, I did like the part where they're separated and you get to find out everything that happened when she's doing her nonsense in Arizona, and he's trying to like, they're trying to like get the tracker away from him and everything. I did think that was interesting to be able to hear kind of what happened, that side of the story, and then hearing about like how Alice like covered everything up and everything. I did like that. I thought that was really interesting. So then the next book that I read was New Moon. The reason being, though, is because, well, I don't really like cliffhangers. So I felt like I was like, I have to flow into the next book or else it feels unfinished in my mind. But the other reason being was near the end of Midnight Sun, he keeps talking about how he like needs to leave when it's like the right time for her. So for me, like looking back, when I first read Twilight, I was like, what? I was like, he was planning on leaving her the whole time? He didn't just leave because, she got thrown into the thing and at her birthday party and the blood and all. I was like, he was planning on leaving her in the first book. He was just waiting. And so I finished Midnight Sun and I was like, well, now I have to go and I have to read the beginning of New Moon so that I can see if I pick up on any of the context clues, or is this just Stephanie Meyer 10 years later trying to justify why he left? And so I started reading like I was like, I'll just read like the first 2 chapters of New Moon just to kind of get the gist and see if there's any like hidden clues that I missed. I ended up finishing it. I couldn't stop myself. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know why I got sucked back in. I don't know. Teenage me, New Moon was my favorite, so I couldn't help myself. I was like, oh my gosh, we're getting so much Jacob time. And so I finished it, and then I almost started reading Eclipse, but I was like, no, you can't do this again. You have to stop. You have to move on. You can't spend your time reading these 600 plus pages on these books you've read forever ago. So I stopped myself, and I only read New Moon, and I didn't keep going. But if we're being honest, I might read Eclipse and Breaking Dawn later in the year, but we'll see. We'll see. I don't really want to keep rereading old books. I want to keep moving on, but I don't know. We'll see. Okay, so the 7th book that I read was The Friend Zone. So I only read this book because this is book 1 of a series, apparently. I didn't know that. I read book 2, which was the Ever Happy Playlist, and I don't know how I found that book. I think I was just probably scrolling through my library's ebook app, and I was like, that looks interesting. But I really liked that one. That one I thought was really great. I didn't know that it was the 2nd book of a series. I had no idea. I thought that the characters were standalone characters, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm totally for this little like contemporary romance. Like it. And then I had no idea. So then I went to the author's page, and then I saw to see what else she had written, because I was like, oh, do you have anything else good? And along came the friend zone, and I was like, oh, and it said like next to it, it was like book number 1, and then under the other one that I read, it said book number 2, and I was like, okay, so now I feel like I have to read book number 1 because I already read book number 2. So in the first book, the friend zone, it's going based off of the main character, and then her friend is, a side character, and then there's this kind of big plot that happens in the friend zone that launches the plot of the second book. So in the order that I read the books, basically the second book totally ruined what happened in the first book. I saw it coming because how could you not? And it was really awkward. And basically for me, reading the entire first book, I was like, I know exactly what's gonna happen. Something bad's gonna happen. Something bad's gonna happen. And so I was like, oh, well, it kind of got ruined for me. And I don't know. I feel like reading the second book first, I had a stronger connection with that main character, and the supporting character, who was the main character in the first book, I didn't really feel anything for her. I was like, you're fine, but I prefer your friend better. And so, I don't know. For me, I thought that the second book was a lot better. I would recommend reading that one on its own. And I wouldn't even read the friend zone if I could go back and do it again. I was like, I don't think it was necessary. I would definitely recommend the second book, the Happily Ever After playlist. If you're going to read either of them, read the second one. Okay, the last book that I read in January, book number 8, was A Beautiful Funeral. So this book is another great example of me not being able to leave series unfinished. So last year, I read the first 5 books of this series, and it was a lot. It's so cheesy. And gosh, so I don't have like any shame in what I'm reading. I mean, I just ranted about Twilight for like 5 minutes. Like, I don't care. Like, I like to hate read things. I like to read things that are kind of like guilty pleasure-ish type readings. Like, I like to kind of do a mix of like, ooh, heavier and like, oh, super light. And so it's so funny saying it. So the Beautiful Funeral is the final installment in the Maddox Brothers book series. I don't even know how I came across this. I think that they were, at one point, the first book was a free book on, I don't know, like Amazon Books or iBooks or something. And years ago, I read it because I was like, ooh, it's free. And so I recently was on my my library's ebook app, and I somehow ran across it, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's like 6 other books in this series. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll read them. Like, I don't know, I like cheap, easy romance reads. And so basically, I don't know, it's so stupid. Like, there's 5 or 6 brothers, who know? I think probably 5 because there's 5 books, and each book centers on a brother. And they're all the same. It's the exact same story 5 times over. I read all 5. I don't know why, because I can't not finish the series. And so this year I was like, okay, I'll just finish the last book and then I'll just be done with this. And so this is the 6th book in the series. And it's like fast forward like 10 years into the future, and it continues on their crazy plot. And it's literally read, or each chapter is like the different, it's from the point of view of every single character, basically, like a different character every single chapter, which normally I like if it's alternating between 2 people. But this was alternating between like 12 different people. And so I was reading the book and I was like, who are we talking about? It was so confusing, where it's like, who is talking now? Who is the main character? I don't even understand what's happening. And I think it's considered like a novella, so it was only like, I don't know, like less than 200 pages probably. So it went super fast, but I ended up just skimming the whole thing because I was like, oh my gosh, let's go. But so, I don't know, I wouldn't recommend it. Don't even get started on this series. It's not it's not interesting. It's just, we all know those books, like the cheap, like iBooks, like, they're free. And so it's like, oh, okay, well, I like free stuff, but I don't know. I wouldn't recommend going down that rabbit hole unless you like to heat read stuff. So that's what I have to say about that. So those are the 8 books that I read this year. So I've read 8 out of 52 books. So I'm way ahead of schedule. I should have only read 4 books for January, but I figure if I get busier later in the year, then I'm ahead of schedule, which is good. So I will catch you next month for February. Thanks for watching. Bye.